Guys, this is Sejong Styler, aka Didi Head, and this is a tutorial on how to do the Touhou 9 project art style. So usually when it comes to making art like this, I usually start off with making a sketch first, mainly to help myself with proportions, as most of the games kind of differentiate when it comes to proportions. For example, when it comes to Touhou 9, usually the main aspect of the proportions for the characters, I would say they follow a sort of doll proportion style, where they're in the middle between adult human proportions, which are usually around 7 to 8 heads tall, while and also between chibi proportions, which are usually 2 to 3 heads tall. For example, with Touhou, they usually have around like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, around 6 or a bit less or more of that head ratio size. So usually when I make art of Touhou characters, I usually start off with sketching out the body. Usually I start off with doing the head, and then from there I do the entire body. Usually I follow, like I mentioned before, I usually follow a head to body ratio, where I usually take the head aspect, and then from there I see on how the rest of the body will go. For example, I do the torso, then the pelvis area, and then from here I do the legs, and then do the arms. Usually the arms and leg are usually usually arms are a bit longer than the entirety of the torso, and legs usually I make both parts of the legs like same size. Along with that, the feet size is usually like kind of smaller than the overall here, and I usually also make the face of the character. After this, I usually make the characters like hair or outfit. For example, with Aya, I made her hat, the hair, her skirt ribbon, her shirt, her skirt, as well as her like Tengu shoes, whatever you call them. And from here, I also made her camera, mainly to help with like proportion, to see how it looks and stuff. Anyways, after making all of the sketches necessary, I start off with making the liner. Now, when you make the liner, I usually make it a size of 1 or 1.5, as usually most Touhou games have the characters at a very small line art size. So make sure of that. As well as the program I use, Paint2Sai, has an option to like change the percentage of how the brush size will pressure of the brush. So for example, I set this to 50, so usually it helps me with making the liner not go too thin or not too thick. Besides that, for the eyes, mainly the eyelashes, I usually set them to a size of 4, and from here I will be usually done with the liner, and I'll be starting off with the coloring. Now, usually when it comes to coloring, I first set up the flats of the character. For example, here you can see the shirt is white, her ribbon and skirt is purple. This is mainly following the Aya alt color that she has in Touhou 9. Usually I take colors off the character sprites. This is especially for if you're making, say, a character that isn't from the game. So usually what I would recommend to do for that is to mainly take the colors from the characters. For example, say if your character has a certain purple like Aya does, you can take from her alternate color, so that way the colors that you are using for your art is similar in this respect. So from here, so after making the flats, as you can see with the hair, I made this white. I'll let you know afterwards on why I did this, but usually when it comes to shading, I usually start off with the skin, and then the clothes, and then afterwards the hair. So we can start off with the skin first. So in regards to the skin, I usually make up to 2 layers clipping to it. So usually the first layer is this sort of beige brownish color, which is like taken from the character portrait itself. And then after this, I add like a way darker orangey brown to it to make it more darker. I also include a layer for her blush, as seen here. You don't technically need to do this, but if you do, usually I suggest to do it on the layer of the skin. So after doing the skin, I do the clothes. Now, the thing about Touhou 9 is that the clothes are sort of depicted in a very distinct way. So basically, when it comes to the clothes, there's usually 2 layers when it comes to it. There is the first layer, which is for example with Aya's shirt, it's a light blue. Usually what I do is I use a brush, and usually set it to say 20 or less than that, and then from there I usually use the brush tool to shade it. I set it to these are my usual settings. I usually set the density to 75 because I don't usually want it to appear apparent, but I usually set it like that. So say here it's sort of not apparent, and I also use the watercolors mainly for blurring purposes. So I do the same thing for the second color, which is usually a darker color, and from here I usually follow the portrait. I mainly take for this portrait I usually took heavy inspiration from her sprite from her actual game, so I usually follow everything that's seen in here. Along with this, as I mentioned before, fun fact about the Touhou 9 art style is that there is a certain sort of overlay of like a grain overlay on top of it. I usually, for this, I set it to both layers of the color of the shading here. So as you can see, there's a small grain noise layer happening here. And usually I set to around a layer of, I usually set the mode to overlay and the opacity to 11 or 10. So this is with the white shirt itself. I also here made a shade, but I didn't do anything with it. Here is for the dark purple. As I mentioned before, I usually follow off with an overlay. But first, I usually add overlay after, but like here I made it all the way down. So this, for her skirt, there's like sort of highlights and shadows. So what I started here was doing the highlights. And then after the highlights, some more highlights on top of those highlights. And from here I made the shadows. And then the last part was basically a multiply layer to sort of normalize the shadows in where they're supposed to be. So after this, I go with the greens as she appears to have on her outfit. From here, I start off with the shine, as I mentioned before. Then the extra shine to it. Then the dark shade of it. Then I add another shade to it, this, which I set to like a multiply layer. And then finally, for this, I made the, well, let me see where I did it. So for this, I made for the hat to like make it look semi-dark, as since if it made it to the multiply layer, it will become too dark. So after this, I have the fan. Same process, just adding shadows to it, and then highlights. I did the same for the things that's used to hold this fan. And then the camera. This is the lens part, and the camera itself. And that's the overall like tutorial for like the explanation for the clothes. Now it's time for the eyes. So for the eyes, I usually do it actually before, after like the skin, but for this I'll showcase now. So for the eyes, I usually do 2 layers, one for the eye itself and one for the outer part, the eye socket or whatever you call it. So for the eye, a fun thing about Touhou 9 is that a lot of the characters have like different eye shadings. For example, the one Aya has here was like, if you compare the sprites to each other, they kind of are very different. So, but for this, I just followed what Aya has here. So what I did was, I first started off with making the darker part. Usually at first, I start off with adding like the dark parts, and after this, I add like a sort of like shine thing part here. Then after that, I add this like black outline on the bottom part, which is also same here. And then finally, I added the white shine of the eye. That's mainly it for it. Then for the eye socket, I usually like shade it with just 1 layer, and like from there it's like done. For this, I also made a mouth for the character, and for this, I set it to this. You can take this, so you take from here, it's like a sort of like reddish brown, and I add the layer for the tongue, and then finally the teeth. So after everything, finally comes the hair. I would say the hair is sort of like the hardest part for copying the Touhou 9 art style, as, to be honest, if you don't know, this was like the portraits for Touhou 9 were done by Alphys and not by Zune, and the way Alphys did the shading for the hair is like very strange. Usually like Zune art usually has the hair sort of like in a watercolor base, but for Touhou 9 it's like kind of more like a cell shading type. So let me just like explain to you how it goes. So as you can see, the coloring is set to white. I mainly set it to this as it will help with mainly to help with how this overall, mainly for the shining part, like the hair shine. So after this, the highlights, I usually add the actual color for the hair. Now as you can see here, the hair itself is like seen as like I usually use the pencil tool to make the format of the hair highlights. And as you can see, it's like not exactly like perfect as it's seen here, because as you can see from this, it looks kind of strange. So after that, I add a darker layer to it, which, as I mentioned before, I take from the actual character portrait. I featured a bit of like blending with the brush, but it's not like seen everywhere else. And finally, I have the blackest part, which usually like makes everything come together, I would say. So yeah, that's it for the hair. Now, after finally finishing all the coloring as well as the shading, what I usually do is I usually color my line art in some way. For example, for the eyes, what I did was I colored the line art mainly for the mouth to be gray, so that it doesn't look kind of strange with the black outline color. For the line art itself of the body, I usually either color it in myself, or for this, I usually set the line art to around 30%. From this, it makes the line art look sort of visible, but also makes it look like it's colored in from the overall colored flat stuff. As you can see, I also made the face itself a different line art a different folder to the line art, as mainly this helps with putting the eyebrows like on top of the hair, and also for if I want to make like a new facial expression, what I would do is say I'm gonna layer like this, and then boom, she's happy. So yeah, you can like do that if you want for the character. And yeah, that's basically all that is to it, to like what I usually do for the artwork. Sorry if this was kind of like rushed and I kind of forgot to like explain some certain points, like say for example how I exactly like brush everything, but hopefully this helped you with like understanding how I make my work. I noticed that one of the comments I made for the post for demonstrating this was to make for Touhou 12, which in and of itself is way different to like the early Windows eras, especially from 6 to 9. So if you guys want me to like make a tutorial for that, I'll be glad to do it. If you guys want me, I would be very happy if you guys would like recommend me a character to do the art with. As I mentioned before, I never exactly like made a character portrait using the Touhou 12 art style, maybe only of 6 to 10. If you want me to do it, I'll be glad to do it. Anyways, thanks for listening to this tutorial, and I hope you have a good day.